Good evening. My name is Cory Morgan, and this is The Pipeline. This is the Western Standard's weekly news panel show where we'll take a few of the top items that are burning up the news waves and dissect and discuss them and solve all the world's problems, or at least try to. We've got a good crowd of folks and a good list of issues to delve into tonight. Before we get to that, I'll start, though, by thanking our sponsor. That's how we can do this, how we can stay independent and get this unvarnished news and discourse to you, and that's the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. These guys are great. If you own firearms, you want to own firearms, you respect the rights of others to own firearms, you should have a membership with the CSSA. I mean, the name says it. It's an association of other like-minded people who want to protect those rights so you can safely enjoy firearms, whether for hunting, collecting. It doesn't matter. It's your business if you're a law-abiding citizen, but there's people who want to take those away from you guys. And if you don't stand up for yourself, you're going to lose them. So check them out. Their website is cssa-cila.org and take out a membership with them. It's well worth it. And there's all sorts of resources there as well that you'll enjoy as you dig through that website. Or just Google them out, Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Okay, let's get to it. There's the three of us here today. I'll start from the end and work my way towards myself, even though Nigel's already dramatic. I see the glasses are taken off all around already. We've got our news editor, Dave Naylor, at the end of the table. Welcome to this week's show, Dave.
Thank you, Cory.
I don't know if you quite have the
quite
have the gravitas
not like Nigel.
that Mr. Hannaford can add to it. But yes, and then our opinion editor, Nigel Hannaford, here today, as always.
Good to see you, Cory.
Yes.
Great column this morning. Great rant.
Thanks. I really had to get it out of
Some
my
things
system.
need to be said.
And yeah, they can certainly get the vein pulsing in the side of my head. Poor Jane, is kicking out of the house. Go do a show. I don't want to hear about it anymore. She's sick of it. But
I thought she told you what to say.
It depends on what we're talking about. Social environments, things like that, where I am quite challenged. Jane's advice is well taken, and I'll just shut up and do as I'm said. But when it comes to the political rants, I still keep my little corner of things.
Way to go.
They should just tell me to get the hell out. All right. Well, what do we got to talk about today? Poor Justin. He's just having a hard time, Dave. We don't often, as you said earlier, feel terribly sorry for Prime Minister Trudeau, but things are kind of getting a little rough for him.
No, you talk about kicking a guy when he's down, but he's the author of his own demise. Started yesterday in Ottawa, where he lectured the Israelis on how they should be conducting themselves. This after 1,400 Jewish people were slain in the most horrible ways. We don't need to go back into that again. And then Trudeau has the gall to tell Israel how to respond. It was met with immediate derision from Benjamin Netanyahu, the leader of Israel, who basically told Trudeau to go pound sand. Again, I think it just shows how far Canada's standing in the world has fallen, Cory, over the last several months, and how basically we're sort of out there on an island of incompetence on our own. So Trudeau took the government jet out to Vancouver to console himself. Thought he'd go out for a nice meal, but pro-Palestinian demonstrators found him, started chanting outside that restaurant, forced him out there. He went with his tail between his legs to Chinatown, try and get another meal down there, where another mob formed, chanting from the river to the sea. More than 100 Vancouver police officers were deployed to protect him. There was a case of a man actually punching a female Vancouver police officer right in the face and gouging her eyes. He was arrested and taken away. So the temperature is really rising across the country in this issue, and demonstrations every day. And Trudeau's not helping himself in any way, shape, or form.
Definitely not. Nigel, and you worked in the Prime Minister's office before, a different Prime Minister, of course, but diplomatically, I mean, Twitter wasn't as big a thing back then, but I mean, for a world leader to take to X to make a response to another world leader, I mean, I think that's kind of another level of a middle finger sort of directed towards Justin Trudeau. It wasn't an official statement to the Israeli government. It wasn't him making a phone call or even doing a press conference. It's like, I'm just going to take 3 minutes on my keyboard to express my disdain for Prime Minister Trudeau and his thoughts and send it out there and we'll consider it done. Would you see it as something of an insult, I guess, in that sense? Or?
Yes, it's certainly something that wasn't happening 10 years ago. But it never would have with Harper, because he didn't attract that kind of. He attracted other kinds of.
Yeah, but he wouldn't wade into
no,
affairs that he wasn't mentally
absolutely
capable
not.
of dealing with.
And that, I think, that is actually the point. This is what we're seeing playing out here. Is, and I say this with some sadness, because whether you agree with Mr. Trudeau, whether you vote for the Liberals or you don't, you still like to think that the office of the Prime Minister of Canada is something that people in the rest of the world would take seriously. You know, if he's got something to say, well, let's just stop and listen. And then, you know, Mr. Trudeau has now reached the point where nobody cares. And I was just looking over some of the comments that he has made that we published. You know, he says of Israel, the world is watching. Boy, that's profound.
Yes.
You know, he goes on. He says the world is witnessing the killing of women and children, of babies. This has to stop. He didn't actually say it's unacceptable, which is the usual word for something that he doesn't like, but he said this has to stop. Well, yeah, you know, I guess we would all like it to stop, and stop right now. But and the violence needs to stop urgently. Okay, this is the kind of fatuous comment that actually causes more harm than good, because we all know that. What's your idea, sir? The answer is he doesn't have one. I don't think anybody does. The only thing is that if you believe, as our government does, that the state of Israel has a right to exist, then they have no alternative but to eliminate the people who nearly a month ago jumped a wall and started killing people indiscriminately in ways too horrifying to describe or to keep going over. So you can't go out there in that climate and start saying these feel-good statements and expect anybody to take you seriously. Militarily, ceasefire is not an option. Nobody's taking him seriously, and that means nobody's taking Canada seriously.
Well, then Canadians aren't taking him seriously or respecting him either. I mean, he's been pandering essentially to the pro-Palestine, or as I would say most often, pro-Hamas mob. But what did that get him? It gets him chased out of restaurants in Vancouver. He hasn't won their love with his mealy-mouthed statements. You know, sort of. He's trying to play both sides. He's doing terribly with both.
Yeah, it makes Canada look. You know, we are the weak darling on the world stage now. That's why we're not taken seriously in the Five Eyes security thing. That's why we're not in the submarine deals with the Americans and the Australians. Our allies just don't trust Trudeau.
So, Nigel, what do you think out of this as well? I mean, we know the international world has been taking Trudeau less and less seriously, basically with every year that he's been in office. I mean, he's always kind of been on the outs on the big conferences. But again, getting back here, what do they expect him to say? What are the pro-Palestine, to give them credit for that name even, what do they expect Prime Minister Trudeau to say? I mean, he's certainly pandered enough, in my view, to them, but they want more, obviously, or they're going to not even allow him to dine.
Yes. Well, look, I mean, they would like nothing less than a full-throated statement of support for their point of view, that Israel has no right to exist and that Israel should withdraw from Gaza now. And, you know, they would like all that, which is very unrealistic because they're never going to get it. And consequently, they're always in this position of being able to confront him and say, well, you haven't said enough, and put him in the position of having to send out the Domino's for supper. You know, like, this is not. He's in a no-win position. He
cannot. He's put himself into.
He's put himself there, And he would have been better off, if he's going to be in a no-win position, he'd be better off to at least pick a side and the right side and support that as powerfully and firmly as his predecessor in office did for the 10 years that he was there to do it. Like I don't see how you can have kind of a half door open for terrorism.
Well, and he just feels that he has to add every time he speaks to something. You know, there was an atrocity committed again, Vivian Silver, when we found out she was murdered, she was dead, and well, it's terrible. May she rest in peace. And he says all the right words, but then he always has to follow up. And we're going to fight Islamophobia.
Yeah,
well, that had nothing to do with this at all. But he always has to tack that on to the end. I haven't seen any. I don't doubt there's people expressing prejudice against Muslim people, and things are getting heated in general. But right now, the more pressing problem we have in Canada is Jewish schools being attacked, Jewish businesses being attacked, Jewish individuals being attacked. I'm not hearing about imams being attacked. Why does he feel compelled to insert that every time?
I look at what's going on in Canadian streets now, the mob scenes in Vancouver with police officers being attacked and, the hatred, the hate speech going on in Montreal, Toronto. And I think back to bouncy castles and honking horns. And they declared the state of emergency for that, the War Measures Act for that. And, what are they going to do to try and stop this? I mean, what can Trudeau do to calm such a powerful issue on both sides? He's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't.
Certainly the Palestinian side, the Hamas side, this is not spontaneous. This is being generated. This is being pushed and being forced. It's not only here, but we saw what happened in London on Remembrance Day. Huge crowds hostile to Israel. This is the big push. They are conducting a PR campaign worldwide in the name of their cause. So in some ways, it's a hard thing for any democratic politician to deal with. But because it is such a hard thing, and because it is so clearly orchestrated and well thought out by the other side, you should know that you can't get away with platitudes. You actually do have to take a position and stick with it.
Well, and
it can't be all things to all men.
No, and maybe again calling out some of the problems. What I'm getting myself tired of, and maybe to clarify, because a lot of people seem confused. A lot of people didn't follow Middle East issues that closely prior or look into some of those things. But it seems the anti-Semites feel if they can just cloak the word Jew and call it Zionist, they can pretty much express any hateful thing they like. I had that problem with commenters on my show earlier today. Just to define, because people might not understand what Zionism is. Zionism is the belief that that Israel has the right to exist. It believes that Israel is the holy land for Jews. I mean, that can still encompass a two-state solution or all sorts of things. But if you agree at its most base level, if you agree that Israel has the right to exist, at least to some degree, you're supporting Zionism. I rattle out a quick poll. I know they're limited on Twitter, but I mean, I certainly have some anti-Israeli people on my Twitter scroll as well, but asking them, do you agree with Israel's right to exist? Because everybody keeps saying that. And well over 90% said yes. So if well over 90% of the population agrees with Israel's right to exist, why are we tolerating the anti-Semites to go after Zionists when they attack businesses, when they attack Indigo Books, even, for crying out loud? Again, can't Trudeau stand up, find a backbone, and speak out against that even?
Yeah, and has anybody been arrested? All this hate speech and stuff like that.
To be fair, there was a Calgary one at one of the pro-Hamas protests who got arrested.
That's right. Yes, I forgot about that. But
it's an exception, it seems.
Yeah, I mean it's one. Your poll shows 90%. It's probably that high across Canada in terms of Canadians who think Israel has a right to exist. But again, it's a silent majority who making the most noise, as they seem to on every social issue these days.
Well, yeah, and platitudes. I mean, Prime Minister Trudeau often says Israel has the right to defend itself. Okay, good, we can agree there. Well, what does that right look like then, Prime Minister Trudeau? Because, I mean, the hospital, as Dave was saying, has been exposed too. That one of the things not enough people are asking and pointing out, but if there was no Hamas presence in the hospital, the Israeli soldiers could have just walked right in and checked things out, walked right out. They were under fire. These weren't patients and doctors picking up rifles and bazookas. These were terrorists in the hospital. It just seems to make so much sense, yet he's afraid to condemn it. And
he just doesn't want.
No backbone, right? I mean, let's call it out. He's got no backbone. And right now he's on his new multi-billion-dollar Airbus or whatever it is, flying to San Francisco for the APEC. And how is he going to embarrass Canada there? Because you know he is.
oh yeah,
Whenever he goes out of the country, you know
doing
he's going to embarrass us. He just, everything he touches these days turns into a mess.
Sometimes, you know, you just got to know when your time is up.
Yeah, exactly.
And it sort of happens that way. You start off slowly, you make mistakes. People think, oh, what an idiot, you know, and then they forget about it. But the next time you make a mistake, they remember that you made one before. They can't remember the details, but oh, yeah, he's done it again.
Cumulative effect.
And after, 2015 to, it's been a little more than 8 years now. In fact, it was around about November the 4th of 2015 when the actual rollover of government took place. The election was on October 19th. Takes you 6 weeks to get everything moved over. So he's had 8 years. And in that 8 years, he has had mistake after mistake, after embarrassment, after scandal, after
ethics violations.
And I think people are finally done with him.
Yeah.
Now this comes on, and where before he may have had some sympathy from the general public, saying, "Well, you know, what's the poor guy got to do? You know, he's the prime minister. He can't just be a." No, they don't give him any leeway at all now for.
No, and there was a new poll out today from Abacus showing disapproval rates spiked in the last week, and it's now at the highest level ever for Trudeau. Even if it was even before all this Israel stuff went, he couldn't go anywhere in public without protests. You know, the anti-vaccine mob, various other people. He would be mobbed with protesters everywhere he went, and then he would vacuously smile and wave as though they were adoring,
yes.
Adoring followers. So.
You know, remember last year we went down to Kamloops. First he went to Tofino, but then he went to Kamloops, and he was made to look a fool there.
Yeah.
In my view, deservedly so on that particular issue. But the public has finally decided that the Conservatives were right. We campaigned saying he's not ready, right?
And he never was.
And he never was.
Never will be.
And he never will be. He has not learned the right lessons from the 8 years that he's had in office, and it just shows. Well, now that we're going into, it seems that in the last couple of years we have been moving into times that are rather more challenging than the times that the few years before, and the lack of readiness, the lack of I would have to say the lack of intelligence, certainly the lack of wisdom. Two aren't necessarily the same thing. But the lack of wisdom is really shining through. And the big question now is, will the Liberal Party allow him to stay there for the next election?
Because if they do, the polls show they'll be decimated.
Yeah.
That clock is ticking on them too. I mean, you got when you're talking about running a leadership race, allowing a new leader to establish themselves, you want to get on that soon.
And they did appoint recently election chairs. I know they're working to get the people in place in writing. So I think the way that he so vehemently argues with Poilievre in question period, he thinks in his mind that he can beat Poilievre, and I think he's going to give it a go, and he's going to have to be forced out. He's not going to take a walk in the snow like some politicians did. He's going to need to be dragged out of there kicking and screaming. Kind of like Trump was, I guess, from the Oval Office.
A number of them go that way.
Yeah, but he's going to he'll have to be dragged out of there.
They all have a hard time reading the writing on the wall. I mean, it took, even with Ralph Klein, until his own party, voted 60%, I believe it was, to realize, okay, I've overstayed my welcome. Chrétien was starting to get a little thin on party support by the time he got out of there too. The unofficial races were getting under his feet. it's just the nature, I guess, of politicians once they get in. They've realized they've hit the apex of their career and they don't want to say goodbye to it without a foot to their rear end. I guess, hopefully the Trudeau's venture to San Francisco, we know he'll do something stupid, but let's hope it's just something like something hanging out of his nose during a press conference or something, and not something that'll damage our international reputation.
It'd be more like wearing a cowboy hat in California and kick shoes when you're in Texas. Just sort of the India trip comes to mind. Is how you
Hey, but we could hit some good surfing down there.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of great white sharks too.
A lot of great white sharks. I think the waves are bigger than Tofino, so you may be headed out there.
I know what you guys are thinking, and I don't wish him between the jaws of the shark.
Oh no,
I wish him gone from this. And
just
his
a
party
code brown
gone from this
code
government.
brown to rattle him up, with a fin behind
Yeah.
him. I don't want to see him actually chomped.
There were rumors he missed a lot of the G20 meetings, and like I'm just saying, if he goes surfing, that's time he's not embarrassing.
Time
the
that he
country.
can't do. Yeah, that's
Right,
true.
so-
Yeah, I understand he's quite a competent surfer, so he might
Yes,
even actually
surf away, Justin, please.
Yeah,
Go
no,
surfing.
it's
Make us look good. Do it for all of us.
Establish his surfing circuit for his next
Yeah, we
career.
could- we
Maybe
could
he'll
have
say,
a-
you know what, I want to step out and go do this.
That's the thing, isn't it? What does he do next? Maybe this is one of the reasons why, just to sort of step back and look at this man. His marriage has just come to a very public end, and nothing in it looks very pretty. He has lost total public support in Canada. You mentioned the polls; they've been going like that. And on a purely personal point of view, this must be a really dark place for him at the moment.
And I mean, a lot of other prime ministers, they'd be a lawyer or they got a bunch of directorships and things to look forward to afterwards. The speaking circuit, perhaps, for Trudeau, but there's not much else.
Come on, guys, boo-hoo. This is a guy with millions and millions of dollars in the bank.
I
mean, who amongst us hasn't gone through a breakup?
What keeps him from wanting to leave is all.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, he's not going to get. He's not going to get the corporate. He's not going to get the corporate gigs. Let's say Jason Kenney got immediately after he retired. But he could make $40,000-$50,000 a speech somewhere over in Europe.
All he's got is the limo and the private jet right now.
Yeah.
And
the chef and the house.
Once those things are gone, then he's
level.
Lots
to pay for his own limo and private chef.
Yeah, that's it's an interesting time for him, but it's also an interesting time for the country. And could he please move on?
Yes. Okay. Well, moving on. Let's see. We got to get more into Alberta, but I mean, it reflects, I think, in a lot of provinces. And looking back, I guess, the report on the provincial response to the COVID pandemic, what was right, what was wrong. Dave, what did you catch out of that report from Mr. Manning?
Yeah, this is a report, I think, demanded by, here's the report, demanded by Premier Kenney at the time. $2 million went in it, probably the easiest $250,000 that Preston's ever made in his life. But they came out with a report today with three main specifics. The first, strengthen the Alberta Emergency Management Agency. And basically, in any sort of provincial emergency, they would be the go-to guys. Have lots of scientific advisors, have a chief scientific advisor. And one of the things that the panel said is reject school closures. No more school closures unless it's an extreme crisis. And in that case, close them, but get them open again as quickly as possible. The second one was protect basic human rights and freedoms. Seems kind of obvious, but some of them were a bit hindered during the last pandemic. And the last recommendation was to increase healthcare capacity during emergencies and pandemics. This is what we would know as known as the surge. Surge when you get a whole bunch of patients at once and hospitals can't cope. So they were, and they said yes, the government has already started to move in that direction. So, I mean, nothing shocking in the report, Nigel. Do you see anything?
Well, actually, I won't call it shocking because it ought to be standard, but it's a very different report than what I would have expected to come from a panel appointed by a different party. And putting Preston Manning there, I think was a master stroke, because he gets right down to the heart of what upset so many people in this province during the COVID, which was the authoritarian character of the government response. And if I may just read this, the temptation is for democratic societies to increasingly imitate the authoritarian model in their responses to emergencies. This is Preston Manning said, this is what other people were trying to do. And you can sure see it in Quebec, you could see it in Ontario, and you could see it in Alberta. So that is the temptation, to bring the experts in, let the experts tell you what to do, and then meekly go off and do it. So he continues from that and says that he shouldn't, the panel shouldn't actually, it's beyond the scope and capability to thoroughly analyze what needs to be done to ensure that the governance model followed by Alberta is democratic, not authoritative. And then he says very emphatically, suffice it to say that at a minimum, a democratic government response should be characterized by a more meaningful role for the elected assembly. Transparency, full public disclosure of the who, what, why things are being done, regular feedback from the public with the aim of rapid correction of mistakes on the ground, noting that such traditional feedback mechanisms often broke down during the COVID epidemic. So this is a recommendation of a very open, responsive government that is listening to people and is aware that they do actually have rights, and that once there's a civil emergency, the rights don't just evaporate. How do you preserve people's rights? He asks the question, and then he provides the answer, as you described. And the one thing that I sort of thought to myself, well, it's a pity why didn't we do this anyway? His first recommendation is that to strengthen the Alberta Emergency Management Agency through legislative amendments and budgetary provisions. Okay, to make it the lead government agency responding to any future emergencies. Well, it always was. And we had an emergency plan. And the first thing they did, you'll remember this because you wrote about it even before I worked here. I read you. And you were saying that the first thing they did was throw the plan away, as did every other province and the federal government, by the way. Suddenly this, what do we do? We had an excellent plan in this province, and it was just ignored. Now they're saying we need to get a plan. So the thing is, how do you get people to stick to it?
Yeah, his name's escaping me now.
David Redmond.
Yes, because I'd had him on the show, and we'd spoken because he was quite frustrated and furious, put a lot into that. And I mean, you can't plan for everything, but you try your hardest and you put something together. And then when you just ignore it and fly by the seat of your pants, which, contributed to the fate of Kenny, I think in some ways, what I was kind of hoping for, though, and it kind of seems a little back and forth in some ways, as we're looking in hindsight, that was clarifying who's the authority when it comes to the big decisions. We saw court cases now that were thrown out because they would bat it back and forth. Well, it's Dina Hinshaw who brought this in. Well, no, it wasn't Dina Hinshaw. It was Premier Kenny who brought this in. In this case, it's talking about empowering the experts, but at the same time, empowering the legislature. Well,
I think it means they're taking the power out of the doctor's hands,
yes,
and they're giving it to elected officials.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
So
the
That's how I read
responsibility
this.
should
Yes.
land on them.
So if
clearly as
the emergency happens tomorrow, it's Danielle Smith's problem to deal with.
That's the kind of clarity I think we need to see now and looking back, because it I think cost faith from the citizenship when they'd see both sides kind of finger pointing at each other whenever things went badly, or another side would take credit when it would when numbers would go down, Premier Kenny would come out and say it was our government actions, and when the numbers would go up, oh, that was a Dina Hinshaw.
I mean, look, as a piece of prose, this is about as interesting as a long drink of warm water, okay? So it's not like people are going to be downloading it and sitting up at night by candlelight reading it. But I will say this, that anybody who does take the trouble to do that, if they were on the right side of the issue during the COVID years, they're going to take great encouragement that this has been written, and I would have to hope that will be adopted by the government of Alberta.
Well, an interesting thing, because it was one of the dumbest moves of them all, was the school shutdowns, the playground shutdowns. I mean, a year into it, we had some pretty solid evidence that whatever things COVID may be, children, thankfully, if they didn't have a bunch of other conditions, were virtually immune from it. They were not at risk. It was not killing kids. So it should have been the last place that would be shutting down. We got a break on this, let's embrace that and carry on with their education and let them play basketball and skateboard and play hockey. Yeah. But we didn't do that. But we might not be so lucky with the next one. So we got to be a little careful too. I mean, the Spanish flu, for example, decimated children. If we had something like that was infectious and really harming children, then closing schools would make sense.
The problem with this one, Cory, was it was an overreaction. Yeah. Right? I remember Premier Kenny talking about having to put body bags at McMahon Stadium.
Yes.
Right? I mean, come on.
Or the emergency hospitals that never
emergency hospital, the field hospitals, that was an SNC level and scam too, I think. But you obviously you have to watch with interest, watch with concern, see what's happening, and then make your decisions. Back at the start of the COVID pandemic, every government overreacted at the same time, and it became a mess across the country.
So let's just remember why that happened, Dave. Everybody was, if you read the testimony given by Theresa Tam in February of 2020, before it was declared an emergency, she actually had a pretty good handle on what this was going to look like. She told the Parliamentary Health Committee that this was something that was going to affect older people more than younger people, and that is where they should be focusing their efforts. So that was in February. Then came March, and an epidemiologist in London, named Dr. Neil Ferguson.
Yes.
Remember?
I know as well.
Okay, and he came out and said, we're all going to die in 3 months.
And he's got a long track record of bad predictions already.
But somehow or other, he is still the go-to guy for a situation like that. Yeah. And it so rattled the governments of Canada, and every other country, by the way, that all thought and reason was lost. We were not the only province that had a plan and abandoned it. Others did too. Spectacularly, the federal government did. And it also forgot everything that Theresa Tam had said before the thing was declared an outbreak. She was even saying masks aren't going to do you any good. And she hung on to that for probably 6 or 8 weeks after the declaration, until finally, I think, I'm speculating here, but I think somebody said, look, you either fall in line on this, or we can find ourselves a new chief public health officer, because this is the narrative. This is what we've committed ourselves to. Politically, we are now on this.
Well, and something else that came about that was strange, and I think they're kind of talking around it or addressing it. We canonized our health experts. In every province has their chief medical officer, federal. We'd never heard of them before. I mean, they were usually chasing herpes outbreaks at school proms or something. It wasn't really a big status thing. They were the ones who ate alone in the corner of the legislative cafe in the mornings. A well-paying position, an important one, but not a high-profile one. And I remember T-shirts of Dina Hinshaw going around, and I think the PEI health officer, they had one with her with a Superman outfit flying. These are bureaucrats. We shouldn't be turning them into heroes, and plus it can impact their decision-making. I mean, some of them, I think, sort of learn to embrace that sudden attention and importance and spotlight.
But Cory, that so often happens when there is a crisis. Say there's a war. What happens? The people who you never agreed with, not everybody liked Churchill in 1938, but in 1940, everybody was on side with him. What happened? Well, there was a war. We needed a hero. And so you now have a crisis. we need some heroes for people to fall in behind. And there were various other ways in which the public relations effort, we're all in this together. It's just like the Second World War. You know, you look out for me, I'll look out for you. The little slogans that we said were all designed. It was like the home front, you know.
Yeah, just unlikely figures, though, still as opposed to
so
political
these
ones.
people came forward, and we allowed them to be canonized, as you say. I'm not saying they're incompetent, stupid, or anything, but it just was not the role.
That's what I mean. I'd rather that they stuck to their role of generating the charts, the graphs, and providing the sort of evidence that was their specialty, rather than being the public face.
Yeah, well, that was, and now you've nailed it, Cory. That was the whole thing. As long as they were the public face of this, the politicians didn't have to be.
Yeah, they could hide from some of the
they could
responsibility. But either way, strange times, and that's what this report's about.
So what he's saying is the politicians need to be front and center on this thing.
And take
good for Preston.
And take some responsibility too. Well, that's good. And again, I mean, some of the T-shirts might have sold, but at least Dina Hinshaw's bangs never caught on, so we didn't have to look at those around the streets. So
there's one for sale in the thrift shop just down near where I live. Do you want to pick it up for you?
I would.
Dina Hinshaw shirt or her bangs?
No, what's her name? Bonnie Henry.
Oh, Bonnie Henry. Okay, yeah, the BC version. Yeah, I think it was kind of a strange times all around, and we're still trying to figure out.
Let me know what size you are later.
Okay. It's growing. All right. So finally, a little darker, unfortunately, actually a lot darker. Well, that's a dark subject as well. We've got a gang war breaking out. There's no doubt about it. And the age of the participants is just terrifying.
Yeah, it's been going on for years in the Lower Mainland, mainly between the United Nations gang and another gang called Brothers Keepers. They've been killing each other for years down there, but now it's spreading across Canada. This week we saw a gang killing in Toronto. A couple days later, you had the awful scene of an 11-year-old murdered deliberately because he was with his gang-affiliated father. Fortunately, another child who was in the vehicle, not related, was able to escape. This guy was affiliated to, I believe it was the UN gang in Vancouver, and he was a target of an assassination attempt in 2022. He was sitting at a restaurant with his family. Somebody opened fire, and he escaped this time. So he was obviously living on borrowed time, and a gunman in a BMW followed him, shot him as he arrived at a fast food outlet, fled, and then, as gangsters do, they set the car on fire and escaped. Very difficult for the police to solve these type of crimes because nobody will help them if there's witnesses want nothing to do with it. A couple of days later, we have a shooting in broad daylight in Calgary's Marlborough area, Marlborough Park, at a shopping center parking lot, where a man is gunned down in his vehicle. Two other people associated with that vehicle were hit, taken to hospital in critical condition. What happened there was the bad guys fled. Citizens at the scene were quickly able to give police a description, and the Hawks helicopter picked them up, driving rapidly across the city to Chinook Center. And then the Hawks was able to follow them as they went to a house in Dover. TAC team surrounded the house. They took the gunman into custody, seized all that sort of stuff. Shocking news the next day. The gunman, the hitman, 14 years old. He's arrested and charged with first-degree murder. His brother, 18, charged with being an accessory after the fact. And it's all linked to this gang warfare. So not only do we have 11-year-olds getting killed, we have 14-year-olds as the hitmen. I mean, it's out of control, guys. It's out of control. It's tit-for-tat retaliation, and it's only going to continue. It's only going to get worse. And mark my words, I hate to say it, an innocent person's going to get killed one day. Just like they did in the Rock Machine and the Hells Angels were battling in Montreal.
Covered a lot of this over a lot of years. When these criminals go at it, they're not terribly discriminating about who else might get caught in the crossfire. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
Especially, again, if they're, I wouldn't imagine one of these gangsters in their 30s is a smart person or a good person, but they might be a little more controlled when they're putting guns in the hands of 14-year-olds.
Well, that's actually smart.
Well,
There's a
for avoiding
14-year-old
charges and such, yes.
The 14-year-old, I mean, he will face consequences, but it's nothing like what you would face if you were not 14 but 34, in which case you would be looking at significant jail time and all that goes with it. This kid will...
Maybe they're smart. The 18-year-old brother says, okay, Sunshine, you're going to be the killer because you can only do 3 years. If I'm the killer, I do 25. I'm only going to get 6 or 7. You know, we'll be out at the same time together, and then we'll be gang hierarchy.
Yep.
So, I mean, yeah, plus, but you've damaged a 14-year-old kid for life.
Yeah, but look, well, the business they're in,
Yes.
they're damaging. How many people die from illegal drugs?
And we've seen that in Los Angeles too. I mean, the Crips, the Bloods, when the apex of their gang wars in the 80s and 90s, they were often 15, 16, 17-year-old kids who were participating and targeted in those.
Yeah, and the Vancouver police, I think it was last year, they put out a big picture of the top 10 gangsters in town, and they said, stay away from these people. These people are targets, and they're going to get shot. So if you see this guy and you're sitting in the same restaurant as him, get up and leave, because you don't know where the bullets are going to fly. And it's once you're in the gang, you can't get out. And there's families in Vancouver who have lost multiple children to this gang warfare. They've been shot by the opposite side. It's...
David, is it true, or is it just one of those things that we like to believe, that there was sort of a code in criminal organizations that business is business, and we kill each other, but we leave the women and the children out of it? Was that ever?
No, that is definitely true. And the line was crossed a few months ago in Montreal when the wife of a reputed mafia gangster was shot and killed in Montreal. And the Edmonton police in their press conference today, a couple of days ago, said, yeah, the code has been violated here. Normally the kids are left alone.
And that just escalates.
It wasn't a case, Cory, that this kid got just caught in the crossfire. No, he was intentionally targeted and shot deliberately because he was associated with the gangster. So that's a concern now. It's once that line is being crossed,
yeah,
I'm not sure they're going to retaliate. Going to retaliate crossing the same line.
We've only got 5-6 minutes on a huge subject. They didn't leave us enough time, but I mean, this all ties in. It almost always ties into drug trade and the opioid epidemic. Where there's money, the gangsters are going to follow. Where there's drugs, the gangsters are going to follow. But how do we fix that? That gets onto where the legalization people say, well, if government was the drug dealer, it would put these guys out of business. I think that's a simplistic and dangerous way to look at it.
And the thing you have to look at is these are just the street level guys, right? There's an entire hierarchy and then hierarchy and another hierarchy, probably topped off with the Mexican cartels. And
Arthur had reported ties.
Yeah, we had that exclusively earlier this year, but they've been here for a while. They're entrenched, but you don't hear from them. You don't have Mexican nationals arrested shooting people on the streets of Calgary. They assign that work to the lower gangs, and it is a case. It's almost like a terrorist network. You've got cells, right? So if one cell gets arrested, they can't bring down the rest of the gang. So it's very, very tough for police officers. Calgary police got lucky this time because they got a good witness description and they were able to follow the killers. Edmonton police have made no arrests. It's going to be a very, very difficult case for them to solve. They're just not easy. They're the upper hierarchy of the gangs. They're not fools. No. They're in it to make money. They're already very rich, and they want to keep getting richer.
And to the point of the people who say, well, if you make the government the drug dealer, then you remove the profit from it, then it goes away. Well, maybe to some degree.
I don't see that as a path. I'm just saying that's what we know we're going to hear.
We did that with marijuana. So now the fight on the street is over drugs that are even deadlier. Okay, let's have supervised injection sites, take all the, so then they move on to something else. Yeah. They are in the business of criminality, and that is. Yeah,
I read something yesterday on the gummies that are legal. The manufacturers want to increase the potency of the gummies because the ones that are sold on the street are much higher potency, much higher high.
Well, yeah.
So, even though it's illegal, you're going to go for that one, aren't you?
Well, and the issue we're seeing on the West Coast too, where they're having dispensaries and they're handing out free hard drugs to addicts, but all the addicts are doing, and it's getting reported more and more, although they're trying their hardest to hide it. We'll have to do another show on that. But it's they will grab those. They don't want those. It doesn't give them a good enough high. They sell those to often new addicts or kids so that they can trade them up for harder drugs again from the gangs and criminals. So, I mean, legalization is a simplistic approach. It just doesn't work.
You know, and even without legalization, you think back about 15 years ago when the story was on the 34th floor at 5 o'clock. He slipped into the stockroom and cut some cocaine, you know. Very rich people were doing these drugs and they're therefore enabling the street level guys to make a living. So who actually is responsible in that situation? The customer or the dealer? Because we always spend our time going after the dealers.
If you can get the demand out, the dealers are gone. One way or
That's
another.
right. So maybe the
treatment and
this sounds horribly simplistic, and I know it's never going to happen. But frankly, remember that high school advice that they were giving out a few years? Just say no to drugs.
yeah, Nancy Reagan.
Nancy Reagan, that was a bit of a failure.
Well, it was a failure, but she wasn't wrong.
No, if we can try and find ways to reduce the demand or treatment or other things. Well, we've run out of time, and as I said, that's a big issue. But hopefully, we just aren't seeing as many tragic shootings. And as Dave said, it's probably just a matter of time. But we can still hope that we don't see any more innocent people, anyways, get caught in the crossfire before somehow there's resolution. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, guys.
It's good to be here, Cory.
Quite solve the world's problems, but we spoke on some of them, and we're working closer towards it, I think. And thank all of you guys for joining us today. Be sure to take out a subscription, westernstandard.news/membership. That's how we pay the bills and how we can stay independent. And tune in next week at this time. We'll have a few more new issues to discuss. And there's always lots more news happening every day. So thanks again. We'll see you then.
Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. To become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny. You can become a Western Standard member for just $10 a month.